So with us now, former prosecutor with the Eastern District of Virginia, Gene Rossi. He previously tried cases before the judge presiding over the trial of Paul Manafort. Judge T.S. Ellis, who, as the New York Magazine points out, is among the handful of judges in the country who know some of the deepest secrets of the Russia investigation. Thanks so much for being with us, Gene. I guess the first question I have to ask is, what's with Judge Ellis's deep antipathy for the prosecution? It seems to come out just about every day in the courtroom.
Are you still not hearing Joe?
Not here.
Joe, we have a little bit of an audio problem, so I'm going to translate your question to Gene. Joe's basic question is, so what's the deal with this judge? He seems to be exhibiting a hostility towards the prosecution, seems to be putting his thumb on the scale. There's been a lot of discussion of that. What's your view about whether or not that is the case?
Well, let me tell you how I know Judge Ellis. I appeared in front of him for 20 years. I had 20 trials, 7 trials, and I had hundreds of hearings. And here is the scoop on Judge Ellis. He is not a potted plant.
Clearly. Clearly not.
He's very active. He wants to be engaged.
Yeah.
He's not a judge that's going to sit back.
Yeah.
That's who he is, and he's never going to change. Yeah. Let me address how he's putting his thumb on the scale. This is sort of like a football game. 2 weeks ago, that first week, Judge Ellis was indeed putting his thumb on the scale, in my opinion. Very hard on both prosecutors, all 3 prosecutors, whom I know well. That was the first week. This past week, things changed a little bit. He's pulling back on his criticism, his interjecting, and I think at the end of last week, I wouldn't say it was affection, but the warmth, relative warmth he showed the prosecution's case seemed to evolve a little bit, and here's why. Based on my times in front of him and my trials and my hearings. I think he now gets this case. He now sees the big picture, what I call the final mosaic. And as I said before the camera came, I have done 30 tax trials. I have never seen more greed, lies, and manipulation in a tax trial than I have seen in this one. It is off the charts. On a scale of 1 to 10, on greed, a 13. Lies, 11, manipulation, 12. It's unbelievable. I think Judge Ellis now has pulled back his interjecting in the case. And in fact, he sort of apologized a couple days ago when the prosecutors were reminding him that he did not exclude a certain witness. Right. It wasn't a full-fledged apology, but coming from Judge Ellis, that's an apology.
So you see the way Judge Ellis is behaving. What do you make of how the prosecutors are pursuing the case, where they place Gates and the kind of case that they're putting on?
I did 100 trials, so what you do is you try to place your witnesses strategically. And I got to compliment the prosecutors here and the defense attorneys. The defense attorneys are doing a great job with what they have. The prosecutors started off with documents and verbal testimony. Heather Washkuhn, Philip Aliff, Cindy Laporta, and others. And then they followed it and put Gates on Monday of last week. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And I watched and observed Gates' testimony. I'd love to talk about that. That was a brilliant placement of Rick Gates because after he testified, he corroborated in part all what the other witnesses said and the documents. And now, these last few days, we've been bank fraud, bank fraud, bank fraud. That's document-driven. And now we get into Stephen Calk and the Federal Savings Bank, the Yankee tickets. You know, we're almost forgetting that Rick Gates testified. We're now focusing on the bank fraud. I thought their timing of their witnesses in the sequence was brilliant.
You just said you wanted to talk about Gates' testimony. Talk about that.
Let's talk about that. I thought Rick Gates' direct exam by the prosecutor was outstanding. Outstanding. He corroborated everything that the government theory is asking the jury to believe. And I want the folks watching this show to focus on one exhibit that sort of encapsulates who Rick Gates is. This is Government Exhibit 391. It's an email from Paul Manafort, March 16, 2016, to Rick Gates. And Paul Manafort says, Rick, You are the quarterback, quote unquote. That is the theory of this case. Rick Gates was indeed the quarterback, but who was calling the plays? Coach Paul. And I'm not talking about Paul Bear Bryant, I'm talking about Paul Manafort. That email is devastating. And Rick Gates' testimony and the documents corroborated that email. Now let's talk about Cross by Kevin Downey. And I said the defense attorneys are doing a great job with the hand dealt them. Kevin Downey did a fantastic job. He got in some jabs. But the problem is he didn't get in enough jabs. He didn't knock Rick Gates out. And on redirect by the prosecutor, he brought the jury back to the core of Rick Gates' testimony, which is, I was his quarterback. He called the plays.
Gene, we gotta leave it there. I gotta say to Joe, thank you very much for your wisdom on this. Joe, it sounds like Gene is not definitively not in the category of those who think that the prosecution is in any trouble, despite the judges, some of the judges' thumb on scaling, and despite
Yep.
some of the Rick Gates testimony that seemed to not go particularly well from him. One bad day of testimony. It seems like it looks like, from this point of view, at least from where Gene sits, still a slam dunk for the prosecution on this case.
We shall see. That's been the assumption for some time, and a lot of, often in these trials that the media cover, you have that assumption going in, and then there are surprises once in a while. We'll see if it happens here. Well, still ahead, the Trump team wants Bob Mueller to wrap his investigation up, but how could that be possible when they keep providing more and more potential evidence of obstruction? Plus, Ivanka Trump said she wanted to be a force for good in the White House. We're going to be talking to columnist Margaret Carlson about whether the first daughter and presidential advisor is living up to that ideal. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.